So I'm going to talk about refactoring web interfaces. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible so that we can actually have time for questions and, make it sort of a Q&A session because it's supposed to be a workshop. But if not, if that doesn't work out, you're always welcome to come find me and ask me questions. So I'm a product designer at Do. We basically are just a productivity app to help people work better together. I'm going to start with a quote that says, "It used to be that designers made an object and walked away. Today, the emphasis must shift to designing the entire life cycle." I like to focus a lot on workflow and process. Anyone else in here really into workflow?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Awesome. A lot of people I know are just like not into that. So refactoring is a big part of my workflow, and I actually really love refactoring. I know some people think that's weird, but I love it. I think it's fun. Anyone else? Yeah? Cool. Awesome. You're my people. So sometimes refactoring kind of gets put on the back burner because it's considered busy work. But I think it's really important and it shouldn't be put on the back burner. If you ever said that you write code perfectly the first time, you're a liar, and I don't believe you. Because nobody writes code perfectly the first time. I don't care who you are. It's not true. So the reasons we need to refactor, excuse me. So if you have a lack of clarity in your code, it's going to lead to a lot of confusion, which is going to basically slow you down, slow your team down. And if you have no maintainability in your code, that's going to lead to inefficiency. And the more efficient we are, the quicker we can actually spend time making cool stuff. Excuse me. So refactoring is to change the structure of existing code without actually changing the behavior of that code. And so I think a lot of what people think about when they think about refactoring is like getting rid of code smells. And that is a big part of it. For me, it's not just about code smells, but it's just about like the general workflow of everything I do. Anytime I'm working on a feature or whether it's a new feature or an old feature, there's always some sort of refactoring involved. I love SASS. I don't think I have to be an evangelical about SASS because we're all at SASS Conf, so I don't have to tell you how awesome SASS is. But SASS is really awesome and is a big part of my workflow. I also care a lot about style guides, and we've been hearing a lot about style guides. I'm pretty sure there were 3 or 4 different talks that talked about style guides yesterday. Back when I wrote this article on A List Apart, it's just about an interface style guide. At that point, I had only been doing them on wikis or printed PDFs. I hadn't really thought about doing a living style guide at that point. But since then I have, and I've just realized that refactoring style guides and SASS are perfect together. They go together so perfectly. So a little while back when I used to work at Engine Yard, I wrote a blog post on their blog called Front-End Maintainability with SASS and Style Guides. And this was basically not only my first time trying a living style guide, but it was also my first time using SASS. And I was one of those designers that was like, I don't need SASS. I write perfect CSS. I don't need it. Until I had to use it because I worked at Engine Yard, and then I just found myself not being able to work without it. And now I'm, basically promoting it constantly all the time. But the big wake-up call for me was realizing how cool living style guides were. And this is important not just for building, but also for refactoring. It works as a QA system. You can check and see how things are looking in your style guide, and if they're perfect, or if they're broken here, they're probably broken elsewhere. And it also works as a sandbox, so you can build new elements and new components in there. And so basically, you've already done most of the work because you've already built it in your style guide. And so anytime I'm building a brand new component, I'll often do it inside my style guide, so I have that job already done for me. So basically, the idea is obviously like not thinking about creating pages, but to think about creating systems. So I'm going to go through sort of like the way I like to approach refactoring and like my personal workflow. But I want to have a discussion and like see like what you guys do, and maybe we can like share ideas. So I think it's incredibly important that refactoring and documentation is a regular part of your process and not something that gets stuck on the back burner at the very end that you just squeeze in like whenever you have like time or just free time. I think it just should be part of your process. There's this really great quote by Nate Fortin that says, "A fractured process makes for a fractured user experience." And I believe a lot in this. I think anytime like you just have like process breakdowns, like it's going to lead to a poor UI. So at work, I kind of have this role as like the CSS Gatekeeper. Basically, all that means is like anything that gets pushed into the repo, if it has any CSS in it whatsoever, they'll like tag me in the pull request, and then I do a review. And I'm not necessarily saying you should have one person doing this, because that could lead to a bottleneck, but it is very, very important that you have a team of solid front-end people that really know their CSS, review everything, even if you think it's just a tiny bit, like a small change. Have somebody review it, because they might not just be seeing like areas in your code that could be better, but maybe because you're working in a particular feature or a particular area, there could be areas that could be refactored, that could be brought up at that time since you're in there anyway. The key thing I think that is really important is that you don't try to document everything all at once. I've actually tried to do this, and I understand like it seems tedious and it seems overwhelming, and you're most likely probably going to give up. I've been there. I've totally done that before. Don't try to do it all at once. Just do it going forward as you approach things. So if you're making something new, you want to document it at that point. And then when you're revising something, you want to refactor it and then document it. And then like during pull requests, when those like code style preferences come up, just simple things like how you indent things or how you name things, like all those like style preferences that are on your team, those should be documented so that before you do the pull request, you can actually like make sure that you're adhering to those style preferences. And then it's great for like later code reviews. You have something like to kind of look at. If you don't know what your code style preference should be for your team, a good starting point I would recommend is this book, Scalable and Modular Architecture for CSS, or SMACS as it's called. It's a pretty good resource for like how to organize like everything from like your style sheets down to like your selectors and your properties. And I would say like I agree with like 90% of what is in this book, because it sort of matches what I do. So I feel pretty confident with like saying like this is a really great starting point to kind of get comfortable with that. So like at Do, this isn't public yet, but I've been working on the style guide where basically I've just been like writing all these like style preferences and guidelines. And every time something's brought up in a pull request, then I'll come here and like document it. So that's just basically like making that part of your workflow. But you also kind of need to know like where you're headed with things. So I think it's really good to document what your ideal CSS architecture is. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to start moving everything right away, but at least have like a roadmap or like a game plan of where you want things to be. So at Do, we have our web application that's like in a Ruby and Rails code base called we call it Destar. And we also have our marketing website when you go to do.com, and we call that Kenobi. We like Star Wars. Both of these sites actually live in the same code base, like the same Ruby and Rails code base. And it's just a matter of if you're logged in or not. And so I was trying to take a look at like what these two CSS files actually had. And because it's the same team working on both sites, there's always going to be like those same patterns, the same way of doing buttons or the same way of doing typography. And so I started looking at like how I could like consolidate those things, and because they're in the same code base, you can actually share those things, and using like imports through SASS, which is awesome. So it's like you don't have to like do things more than once. So the way we've got things organized is we have our vendor libraries listed first, which is pretty standard. Desktop actually uses a little bit of Bootstrap, but Kenobi does not, and so Desktop gets that as well. We're really into Compass. Compass is awesome. Just does a lot of the work for us. Really into Suzy. Suzy's awesome. I highly recommend these two frameworks. If you're already using SASS, just go ahead and start using these as well. They're awesome. So the way I like to have things organized, and I'd be very interested to see if anyone like disagrees with this or like has a better way. I like to list on what I call dependencies first, and some people call these constants or globals or whatever you choose to call them. But basically, these are the globally used variables, mixins, and functions. If you were to compile these, nothing actually gets output yet. They're just things that you can use. And I like to do it that way. I feel like it's more organized, and if you look at like frameworks like Bootstrap and such, like they will actually put like everything like in their variables file, even if it's only addressing one component. And I actually prefer to put those, component specific variables in the component files. And just like at this level, I'm just talking like site global stuff, like things that are shared everywhere. So like basic things like color, layout, and typography. And then I think about the foundation, and this is just your plain, simple HTML, like, paragraphs, headings, things like that. I highly recommend using border box. It's going to make your CSS life so much easier. It makes the box model actually behave the way you expect it to behave, which is awesome. And I also recommend normalize over the reset, because I think the reset, you end up fighting against it more than it actually helps you. But normalize just does what it needs to do. And so like the way we do our type and our lists and our headings is essentially the same for both sites. So we can share all that. But then like, so Kenobi has a different font than Desktop does. And so we can let each site have like its own style, its own sort of visual design, but share a lot of the same styling. And then components are, your basic like icons, buttons, toggles, like all your different UI elements. And I firmly believe like these should be like standalone pieces that you can drop anywhere. And the styles shouldn't be reliant on where they live, but should just be like standalone pieces. And then of course all the states of those pieces. So like hovers and, clicks and all that stuff. But then with regions, that's where like I start thinking about the location-based stuff. So like sidebars, footers, mastheads, whatever. I try to keep components and regions like very separate from each other. There might be some places where maybe something changes the way it looks based on whether it's in the sidebar or not. I try to avoid that as much as possible, but realistically that's going to happen sometimes. So those would live in the regions file. And then my layout helpers are things like clear fixes and grid systems, and no real semantic like components or naming. It's just like things that help you lay things out. In terms of like placeholder selectors or classes, which one should you use? I think it's all about what the output is. And so usually I default to placeholder selectors because I like that clean output. But occasionally that might lead to a really long selector chain of things that might be sharing whatever it is you're extending on. So in those cases, I'll make that judgment call and decide whether it's going to be a class or a placeholder selector. And then I'll add my responsive styles. And so I've actually kind of been going back and forth on how to do this. And So there's been a lot of blog posts that talk about how like SASS doesn't have an ability to have you write your CSS in one file. Like let's say we're talking about buttons. You want to write all your button styles in one file called buttons, and then you might have responsive styles for those buttons. And like if you were to use media queries nested to keep it all in context, it doesn't output at the end, it just puts it right there. And some people are okay with this. I actually just recently found out that there's no performance impact by doing that, which is why I realized like maybe I shouldn't care anymore. But I used to care, and it is an aesthetic thing too. It's kind of nice to have all your media queries at the end. Like it just looks nice. So you actually can do that with SASS, and it's super easy. It's just with mix-ins. And so you might have your banner styles, and then the mix-ins at the end that target screen or mobile or whatever. And then in your screen media query at the end, you just include those mix-ins. Super easy. It's totally possible. It's kind of, when I sort of like played around with that, I felt like I was like super smart and like a genius. And then that's when Chris Epstein was like, you don't even have to do that. There's no performance impact. I was like, oh, okay. Well, it looks nicer. And finally, I'll have styles sometimes that are purely for development purposes, like grids, like showing baseline grids or turning on diagnostic CSS, like maybe you want to call out images that don't have alt attributes or whatever. What I was doing initially was I was commenting it in and commenting it back out and commenting it in and commenting it back out, because I didn't want that stuff to actually go into production. And so what I didn't know was possible, but apparently it's totally possible, is you can actually change the extension of your SASS file to add ERB if you're using Ruby. And then you can put Ruby in your style sheet, and it'll still compile as SASS, but it'll also use Ruby. Some people think this is weird to do, and I was talking to Chris about this yesterday, and he thinks it's kind of weird and iffy, which I can understand, but it can be helpful. And so basically what this conditional does is just says when I'm in development mode, import this style sheet. But if you're, oh, that is so much better. Awesome. But like if this were to go into production, this style sheet would not get imported, which is really nice. So now I don't have to sit there and comment it in and comment it out. I'm going to show you a couple other tricky, sneaky things I did with ERB SASS files that I say it's sneaky because I mentioned it to Chris and Nathan to see what they thought of it, and they were both like, no, don't do that. But it works for me, so I'm going to show you anyway, but I'll get to that in a moment. So yeah, I have my documented CSS architecture. Basically, the game plan is to put new CSS in its place, move old CSS as you get to it, and then if you have like some tech debt time, you can move more stuff. But if you try to do it all at once in one sitting, again, you're going to give up. Do not try to refactor everything at once. You're going to give up. I can guarantee you will, because I've been in that road so many times, and I always give up because it's too overwhelming. It's better to just do it going forward in iterations. So you refactor when you're adding something new, like a new feature. When you're fixing an issue, go ahead and do a refactor. And then, of course, like during like those code reviews where things come up, like stylistic preferences and such. We heard a lot about UI libraries yesterday as well. I think these are awesome. I really love the concept of object-oriented CSS. I used to not really care for the implementation of object-oriented CSS because I didn't like all the classes. But with placeholder selectors, you can totally do all of that stuff and have a cleaner output. So anytime I'm doing my UI libraries, I kind of keep this idea in mind. I really love, I never thought I would say this, but I really love the Android style guide. They call out everything, like every state, every like variation on things. So like they have like the icon button and then the button that has the icon and text, or maybe just text, or just the icon, or whatever. Like they show every like variation of things. And this is for mobile. It's not for the web, but the concept I think is applicable, and it's a really well organized style guide. So definitely check it out if you're looking for inspiration for your own style guides. So the things that you're going to be documenting are obviously your content, like your lists and tables, text, navigation, status, things like little alerts and pop-ups and such, interactive things and all the different states of that, and of course your icons. And I highly recommend to just go ahead and go SVG or use fonts, because I recently, through work, got this Retina MacBook Pro and realized everything looked awful. And so I tried to do this whole like undertaking of like retinizing all the assets. And I just realized how really annoying and painful that is. Even if you're using like a really complicated function or mix-in that like help make that easier, it's very frustrating. And so if you just go SVG or fonts, you're gonna have a much easier time. So again, showing all the associated states. I think it's really important that you keep the documentation current and useful, because otherwise, what's the point? You're wasting your time, right? There's a lot of tools out there that have come out recently. One of them, for example, is Style.go. Style.go runs on Node and basically will read your style sheet. If you use Markdown for your commenting, it'll generate a style guide for you. And if you're using Markdown headers like H1s, H2s, and such, like it'll show you all that, and it's pretty awesome. I'm kind of more of a roll your own type person. Like I like to make my own style guides. But if you're looking for something to help, like kind of kickstart your style guide, this tool is very useful, and there's other stuff out there too. And I think it's really important that you get to know the tools that you're using. I tend to use a lot of Chrome's inspector. I used to use Firebug a lot, and now I just find myself feeling more at home in Chrome inspector. And basically what I do when I'm refactoring or like fixing a bug is I'll start at that element and then like work outwards from there. And when it comes to like searching to see like what my change might affect, which is really important, I use Sublime Text, but even if you're not using Sublime Text, a lot of these tools are actually available in other text editors. Like if you're using TextMate or whatever, your preferences, it probably has these same features. I love using Command P to like just, if I know the name of the file I'm looking for, I can just type part of that file name without typing all of it. And it pulls it up. It doesn't have to search for it. It's just up immediately. It's so fast. And then, I'm sorry?
Command T does the same thing.
Oh, Command T does the same thing, he said. And then, like, let's say I'm wanting to see if a class can be safely deleted. I like deletions. I will use Command-Shift-F to see all the results of that class. And if that selector or image or whatever it is that I'm looking for is not used anywhere else than the spot that I'm looking at, then it's probably safe to delete it. And that's like the happy zone for me. I love red pull requests. Pull requests should, I wouldn't say this should always be red, but there should be some red in your pull requests. I love red. And then, of course, you check your style guide to see how those changes you just made affect the style guide. If that thing that you just did isn't even in the style guide, add it. This is your time to add it. And then you do your validation and testing. Now, occasionally you do get the time to do a larger refactor, like you're not just sneaking in a refactor. I think it's very important not to try to take everything on at once. Focus on one area at a time. And so like I might do like just a color refactor. And I don't touch type, I don't touch spacing, I don't touch anything but color. And if you give yourself like that barrier, it actually will help you be more efficient and just focus on what you're trying to do. And color maintainability is awesome with SASS. It's great. Like I like to just generate a very simple color palette and then let SASS do the work of making all the variations. And as we know, it can do so much. The lightening and darkening and saturation, grayscaling, mixing, like all that stuff. It's just so cool. So I will use SASS variables to generate a living color palette in my style guide. And it's great because back when I was doing, style guides before they were living, like I had to like update it every single time I changed my mind and changed the color. And so I'll also, if I find myself doing a common like SASS function on a color, like I'm always darkening it by 10% or whatever, then I'll go ahead and store that in a variable as well, and I'll document it. So this is an example of the style guide, a very basic, like beginner style guide that I did when I was at Engineered. It's actually improved quite a lot since my roommate actually works at Engineered now, and she's like totally made the style guide even cooler, which is awesome. So there's a sort of debate I've seen of like how to name your colors, and it's like, do you use color names so you know what color it is, or do you use semantic names? I say use both, and I find it just makes things so much easier. Sometimes it is good to know what color things are, like if it's blue or green, because who really knows all the hex values? If you're weird if you know all the hex values, you're really weird. No one really knows all the hex values, maybe just the grays. Like I know the grays, but by like writing out all my color names, I now have like a palette that I can use, and then in my files, I will just reference those colors. And this is really great for like finding and replacing. If you want to change all the blue buttons to now be red buttons, but you don't want to change all the blues because blues might be applied to certain things that aren't buttons. By doing this approach, you can just adjust the blue buttons and not all instances of blue to being red or whatever, which is really nice. And so I'll keep things in context. So if it's a header, a color used for the header, it'll go at the top of my header file. But then this colors.css goes like at the beginning. So like all my files can reference those colors. And I think that's a lot cleaner. Like I was taking a look at like how Bootstrap does it, and Bootstrap just puts like every single color in one file. And I just think it's like unwieldy and like hard to really like parse as I'm reading it. I'd prefer to just have it simple and then use those variables elsewhere. If you want to know what SASS is going to do with your colors before you like apply it and then refresh your browser, there's this really cool tool called SASS.me, and all you do is put in your hex value, and then there's these sliders, and the sliders will just show you what SASS is going to do to that color, which is really awesome, super helpful. And so I'll use mixins to basically store common pairings of like backgrounds text, and like if I'm using a text shadow color, it's pretty typical that you're going to be using those like pairings like quite often. So like put those in a mixin, and then you have like basically a list of themes that you can apply to your site. So that was color. Maybe you're going to just focus on typography. I think it's incredibly important to just choose a base unit. I like 4 because it goes into 8, 12, 16, etc. And I'll generate my different like font sizes based on that. And then I like to use mixins for my various type styles. Like if I'm doing the big fancy quote style or like the spaced out like small cap style, I'll store those and document them so that they can be reused and not recreated over and over again. And then I think it's also really important to show your different layouts. Like if you have variations on 1-column layouts, 2-column layouts, and things like that. Maybe you have like a top-level page style and then a category page style, detail views, things like that. So I really love Starbucks style guide. Starbucks actually puts like little tools in their style guide where you can see how things are working. And so like you can turn on the backgrounds of your boxes and see like where they actually land. You can turn on the baseline grid. It's just this little like menu in the top right. You can turn on the column grid if you want to see that. And if you're feeling super adventurous, you can turn on all the things and see how they're working. And yeah, it's really fun. It's kind of fun to play with. And again, I use Suzy, so I actually don't have to do a lot in terms of like grid systems because Suzy kind of does that work for me, which is really nice. And I highly recommend doing a responsive iframe sandbox during development. This like saves me so much time when it comes to responsive design. I have basically, at work, I actually have like 2 monitors set up And one monitor will just have this page set up with all the different iframes, and on the other monitors where I'm coding. And using live reload and like a URL string that will fill in all the iframes immediately, like with the page you're wanting to work on. I make my change, all the iframes just change immediately, and I can very quickly see if something I'm doing is going to impact smaller sizes or bigger sizes. It's really, really cool. One side thing I wanted to mention, notice the little like rainbow like stripe thing? This thing. At work we call it the pop stripe. It's kind of trendy. A lot of people have that. I just wanted to show you a really cool function that Eric Meyer helped me with, and it's amazing. It's awesome. Basically, like you store all your colors in a list that you want to use, and it doesn't matter how many colors you use. You can have as many as you want. And then he wrote this awesome function that basically will generate a background gradient, and it'll divide the stripes up by however many colors you've defined. So you can have as many as you want. It can go in any direction you want. And so you just like pop this, basically like if you have like a class of pop stripe or something, you just like throw this function in the background image mix-in, and then you have a pop stripe. So awesome, it's so cool. So I like doing things like that to make things like easier and more maintainable. It's like, rather than like, you know, if you were to generate that manually, like there's just, that gradient code is like this big. You know, because I love that thing so much, I went ahead and threw it on the SASS site too, because I thought that would be really cool. And oh my God, was that the new SASS website? Yeah, that was. Unfortunately, I just checked, and it seems like the DNS still hasn't propagated, so it's not up yet. But it will be at some point today, I swear. And I'll have a public style guide. It's going to be awesome. But yeah, last I mean, if somebody has it up, please tell me, is it up yet? No, I keep refreshing it on my phone. Like, I hate DNS sometimes. But huh?
No, it's not scripted.
Yeah, it'll be up at some point today, I promise you. But here's the part where I talk about how I get super sneaky with my SASS, and Chris doesn't like this. But I'm going to show you anyway because I think it's fun. And actually, I would love if one of you have a better idea or a better way to do this, because I want to learn. Basically, I wanted to make my style guide truly living. Right now, the way a lot of people have to do it, like with color palettes. This is a perfect example, color palettes. You add a new variable with a new color, and now you have to go to your style guide and add that swatch to your style guide. That to me is not really living, because if another designer is working on the project and they add a color, they might not remember that they have to go update the style guide too. And that's so important to me, is that the style guide stays updated. So I got a little sneaky and I actually stored my colors in YAML instead. And then, because remember how I mentioned you can use an ERB extension on a SASS file, I basically generate my variables. But then I also use that same code to, so I generate my swatches and my markup, and then, so I generate the variables for my CSS, and then in my markup, I generate the swatches. So I only have one place that I update my colors. Please tell me if you know a better way to do that, but for right now, that's how I'm doing it. I think so for style guides, it's also important to only show the code you want people to use. So if your site's built on HAML for markup, it doesn't really make sense to show like all the markup that you need for a module if really all you need to show is just like the little like HAML markup. Or like you don't need to show all the different font size, like values and stuff if you generated a bunch of mix-ins and you'd rather people use mix-ins. So there's no point in showing the variables, because then they might just use the variables. You want to show the mix-ins. So just show the code that you want people to use. And again, don't try to refactor everything or document everything at once. You're likely to give up. Just do it in iterations. And refactoring basically helps you create better things, in my opinion. And so my last quote, and then we can talk if we have, I hope we have more time available, is to be regular and orderly in your life so that you may be violent and original in your work. And that's by Gustav Flaubert. I think it's so important that you spend less time like having to maintain things and managing your code and more times like just creating cool stuff. And this is why I think workflow is so important and so awesome. So with that, how much time do we have left? Do we have time to discuss? Yeah? Cool. So I want to hear about your workflows and things that you've discovered that have helped you, like, you know, work better, work faster, because I want to learn from you. So does anyone have a really cool thing they want to share, like, that they've discovered, or? No? Yeah.
For the breakpoint management stuff you were talking about, breakpoint mixin on Team SASS, just to like, so when you're writing your breakpoints, you're able to say and specify for your IE style sheets whether that breakpoint will be included or excluded, and then you can bundle that all together, make a completely separate IE style sheet, whatever it is. So I find that is a very helpful tool to minimize that last phase of pain.
If you write like in that breakpoint mixin, it'll generate it in another style sheet?
If you want to, or it can,
It
can repeat it and do the LT, LTIE9 class.
That's
You can
cool.
choose what class to export it in addition to where it appears in the media query, maybe at the end of your CSS file or whatever you like.
Awesome. That's really cool. I didn't know it did that. Anyone else? And like, if you have questions, feel free to ask questions too. Like, I kind of want this. I want us all to like learn about workflows and stuff. So.
Just make sure you get the mic first.
Okay. No.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
So I saw when you were going through your slides and showing how you have your page regions, like your your regions is so like it's based on like the role in the markup.
Yeah.
So I do something similar in mine where I have like a layout as CSS file, and that I basically have the regions or anything that doesn't fall within like ARIA roles. But there I define like just any like widths, percentages, and all that stuff. Anything that's not like visual, it's more just like structural. And then I have kind of have how you have your regions for like the banner, content info, main, and whatnot.
Yeah.
And there I define like colors and all the other stuff that's involved in them.
So you separate your structure from your theming, basically?
Yeah, basically, so that like regardless of whatever is going on with the header, like background color or like fonts and whatnot, regardless of that, whenever that fits into the layout defines like the size of it and whatnot, and how it lays out within like floated or whatnot, and then the header or what file will define like how it looks. But I was wondering in yours, where like you had one for like the banner and main and whatnot, are you defining like layout and like all the items of how it's supposed to look in that one file, or?
Well, so I do have a grid.scss file, but it's very minimal because I'm using Suzy.
Oh yeah.
And
okay.
so like I'll have like my containers and stuff outlined, but when it comes to like doing like floating and such, I usually just use the Suzy mixins.
Okay.
But in general, my banner CSS file is usually background colors and font colors and things like that. And if it's a structural thing, chances are, like, if I've already defined like list styles and things like that, that's probably already been declared elsewhere.
Yeah,
But
okay.
occasionally I might put layout code in there.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
There was some discussion about things like KSS and DSS and some other talks. What do you use to actually generate them, or is it somewhat of a manual process?
Well, I've played around with KSS and Style.go, and so far Style.go is my favorite of the generators I've tried. But I find that a lot of them aren't really automated. They say they're automated, but I find like with KSS, I don't really care for that. I have to actually make the layout file and number it, and then in my CSS tell it I want you to go in section 1.2.4 or whatever. I think that's weird, like having the hand number things doesn't feel automated to me at all. So I end up just rolling my own most of the time. But I do want to try combining like Style Docker or something with sort of some of the stuff I've been doing to see if I can get the best of both worlds. Because it would be nice to, have the whole CSS just sort of documented like that. It would be cool. But yeah, I know there's one that I forgot the name of it, but it's JavaScript based. It's like
Kalea?
Kalea, thank you.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't get it working, but from what I read and have heard, like it's pretty good.
Yeah,
So-
because I've used, I had to build a style guide that I couldn't really do a lot of the generated stuff, so I had to do it manually, but I think that I use Grunt.js and Yeoman with Assemble, and I think something like that combined with KSS or DSS,
Yeah.
it could be
Yeah, I'm
quite
thinking
helpful.
about still maybe using one of those with the, like I've been working on the SASS style guide, and a lot of it's just, manual, like I just made it myself, but I could see how they could help each other out in some ways. I just don't want to hand number my stuff. Like I
Yeah.
think that's so silly.
Sam Richard has on GitHub Yeoman and Grunt style prototypes.
Yeah,
It
he
can also
actu-
serve as a style guide. I'll look for the link and let people know.
Yeah,
But
he
it's
actually
pretty
said he would
automated.
show it to me today during the unconference, so I'm excited to see
Yeah,
it.
I think it's worth looking
Yeah.
at. It's it does a lot of magic behind the scenes.
Cool. I like magic. Magic's fun.
So if you're not using anything automated, and you're writing your CS or SAS files, do you put comments there and also repeat them in the documentation so you're duplicating yourself? Or do you have some way to move the comments into the documentation or anything like that?
Well, so typically in the past, like I would just, because I haven't been using automation, I would just do it in the style guide because I didn't want to do it twice. But I realized the reason I'm considering using some sort of tool like that is because I realize sometimes people aren't looking at the style guide, they're looking at the code. And particularly with like the SASS website, I know there's going to be people that want to contribute. And so I realized like I didn't really document any of my CSS with comments. And I started the style guide, but I realized I probably will need to go in and like comment everything. And like, the fact that I'm using Suzy, I probably have to explain like what the mixins are doing and how, to get 2 columns or 3 columns and such. So I would love to be able to have that like just in one place and then have it, show in both. So yeah, I mean, I was considering YAML for that too, but if you guys have any better ideas, please like share. And do you know if Sam's thing does that?
It's all here. If you just go to github.com/snugug, it's the Team SASS toolkit.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. Yeah. Cool. Has anyone tried it? Well, yeah. So.
Jason may be using this in his next workshop. Ask him.
Okay, awesome.
Just a quick note.
Sure.
There's a new one that I haven't actually tried it at all, but I just heard about it. Source.js. I don't know if anyone's maybe played with it and could share experience, but it's
Source.js.
recent, very recent. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So many style guide tools now. It's awesome. I love it. Okay, no questions or anything? Maybe I can come up with some questions for you then. See. Well, I guess like when it comes to like fixing bugs and like refactoring, I would love to hear like, what methods and tools that you guys use. So, is anyone gung ho and like refactoring and want to tell us about your way of doing it?
So I work for Meetup, and we have a super old code base, and our legacy style sheets keep hitting the IE style sheet limit. So there's like a big problem we have to deal with. So the way we've been working with this is we sort of created a custom framework, and this handles sort of like the style guide.
Mm-hmm.
So, sorry, hold on.
smart. I could use some water myself.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So what we actually do is we go through, and one page at a time, we turn everything off but the framework. And then we can use that to just like kill 300K of CSS page by page.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you have, like, is that something that you're keeping internal, or do you have it, like, up on GitHub? Or we can
It's
look
on
at it?
GitHub. It's called Sasquatch. I'm not quite ready to, like, present it yet.
That's fine. But,
And-
like, we can take, it'll be up at some point where we can look at it. And,
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
It's actually public. It's github.com/meetup/Sasquatch with
Awesome.
spelled like sass.
cool.
Yeah. I might do an unconference a little later about it, but
You should.
very unprepared and very nervous about talking about it, obviously.
No, you should definitely
But-
do it. I would love to hear it. So. Who else has some cool tools or techniques?
So, as of like the last year or so, especially with building responsive websites, one of the things that I've used now constantly is it was created by 37 Signals. It's xip.io, and it's friggin' fantastic. You can set up your vhost to basically hit this xip.io site, and you can actually do local testing on any device in like your local wireless network, and it can like load your local computer's website. So like if you're working on a site, say like project.dev, you can actually basically edit your vhost so that it's like project.dev and then the wildcard character, so .wildcard.xip.io, and then on any device, like on your phone, on like a PC that's sitting next to you or whatever, you can just enter project.dev. The IP for your computer, your local computer, .zip.io, and it loads like your local site from your computer on any device.
Oh,
And it's
cool.
been awesome for like just making sure that the stuff that you're working on, like to actually test it on the device
Yeah.
and whatnot. It's pretty cool.
They like it too.
Yeah, I think they like
apparently.
it. Yeah.
Hi. I don't know if anyone else has come across this. Is this on? Yeah. Problem, but I work on a large site, and there's a base theme and sub-themes with concurrent front-end developers doing different work. And when a single file in the base theme is being imported by multiple themes, sometimes all the themes don't get updated because the developers are just doing Compass watch, and they're just watching a single file. So we had to write the only solution I could think of was writing a script that we could just run as a check before we, did a push. And I made it a shell script. I'm sure there's a better way for it, but what it does is it looks for all the SCSS files in like the whole theme directory and then just regenerates everything just so that we're 100% sure all the sub-themes are up to date.
Oh, cool.
I don't know if other people have come across this problem, but, that's how we did it.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you guys so much.